Hi, Gary, can you hear me?
Hello. How are you?
Mr. Nelson, can you hear me? Mr. Nelson, can you hear me?
I'll have to move the slides.
Okay, thank you. We just did that. All right. Great, how are you? I have a quick question. Yeah, things are going great.
Luckily, they were so patient, and they did set a couple things on because I had to get this. It was so important to pronounce the names right now. That's large.
Mr. Nelson, can you hear me?
Well, good, thank you for that.
Gary can't hear me.
Where is he? I wonder where he is now. Oh, man.
Hello, how are you doing? All right, how are you?
With a grandbaby. Have you seen? Gary, you in Massachusetts?
We got no audio.
No.
Over yelling at him.
Nice.
I'm like my father, he said, hello, how do you feel?
Great, how are you?
Nobody doesn't work, just yell out at them.
Gary?
We haven't had a board meeting, open to the public physically, it's always online.
Hello.
Mr. Nelson, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
What do you see?
I'm
What do you-
seeing, you should start in a few seconds.
You don't see the picture of the room with board members in it?
I did, and then it went away.
So you just see yourself and a thumbnail of me?
No, it just says your meeting should start in a few seconds.
Can you go out of it and try to come back in, please?
I will.
Thank you.
Right.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You're good?
Yep.
Thank you.
Ready for it. We will be. So you heard that there was a fight on Main Street? I don't know if it was a domestic or some people's. Anna lives not too far, but maybe she knows. Probably. What? I don't bring it up.
Hello, Mr. Dick.
I have listened to the scanner. He said there was a fight on Main Street wrestling last night.
Oh, what else is new?
On my cell phone, I get, well, we do. Lucky I can say that, they're hard to do that, very hard to be seen. And
Hey, Scott, I have no sound now.
Well, it's gotta be, isn't it retroactive for all of them in the past?
I appreciate that. Again, I'm not asking for a friend to get a job, that's enough.
Mr. Nelson, you good?
We're good.
I just had us on mute for a minute.
Okay.
Let me know what you get.
I will.
Okay?
I will. They'll write it down.
We're waiting on, my question is you, right? He said he may be late, he goes, why may be late? He has
Mr. Lawson, wait in a couple minutes. There's a couple board members are still coming in. Okay, so if I mute you, don't panic.
Okay.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is to the front of the room, I guess. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome
welcome all. Just a reminder that this board meeting will be broadcasted live in real time and recorded. So be on your best behavior. So anyways, so we did that. All right. So we're going to go to recognition. As we want to go to recognition, Dr. Kilburn.
We don't have any recognition today.
So then we're
Into visitors.
We'll head right to the oath. Or?
Oh, well, no, we have recognition of visitors after recognition.
Okay.
So we do have some visitors, but they'll be presenting.
Okay.
So we have
So why don't you handle that?
Margarita Montanero she's our supervisor of HR, standing in the back. You want to give us a wave, Margarita? Jump up and down a few times, maybe? Just kidding. No, you can have a seat. We're just introducing ourselves. Thank you. And we have Erica Schaaf from P-Tech. Hello, Erica. We have Elaine Falvo, and we have Christopher Hill. Welcome. Hey. And we also have, P-Tech principal Erica Schaaf, and I can't see him, but I know he's there, and that's Mike Hoover. That's P-Tech social studies teacher, Mike Hoover. They'll be presenting to us later on in our meeting.
Fantastic. Okay, so do you want to have, we'll have, do we have to take roll call first? I forgot to ask about that. We do? Okay. Deb?
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. So when I call your name, can you please say here? Mr. Boucher?
Here.
Mr. Stewart? Here. Mrs. Anderson?
Here.
Mrs. Corbin?
Here.
Mrs. Irvin?
Here.
Mrs. Falvo?
Here.
Mrs. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Nelson?
Here.
Mr. Nicotera? Dr. Porcelli?
Here.
And Mr. Salerno? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, Deb, do you want to proceed with the oath of office, the swearing in?
Yes, thank you.
There's an on switch on the top of that mic. Pull it towards you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Would Mrs. Corbin, Mrs. Falvo, and Mrs. Johnson please stand? Okay, if you'd please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I'll faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties
the duties
of the office of Cooperative Board Member
of the office of Cooperative Board Member
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Would you please sign your oath cards? They're in the folder. And then I will collect them. Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. Okay, so now, Doctor, we go off to communications from the floor and correspondence.
I do believe you have a thank you card for correspondence.
Yes, yes, yes. We have here a thank you card from, wait a minute, it's not the, Tanya, it's not Tina, Tanya Aquaviva, and who has just recently retired. And it reads, Dear members of the OHM Cooperative Board, thank you for the thoughtful gift for my retirement. The gift of time is something that I'm looking forward to, and I will forever be grateful for the time here at OHM BOCES. Sincerely, Tanya Aquaviva. So, very nice. I like thank you cards. Very cool. All right. All right, now we're proudly off to the district superintendent's report.
Yes, so today we have the pleasure of two presentations for the board. One regarding an update on our human resources. As we remember, we had done some restructuring with human resources and CBO. and the other to talk about grading and grading of students here in our OHM BOCES. So we're going to begin with the HR update. And I'd like to introduce to you the amazing Margarita Montanero. No pressure, Margarita. On your table, you have a one-page report. Now, Margarita will really be speaking to you through this. So, of course, feel free to attend to Margarita and use this as a reference later if you'd like. It just kind of does a snapshot of some of the points that she will be making today.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Dr. Kilburn asked me to come and provide an update on our Human Resources Department. In October of 2020, I was afforded the opportunity to start supervising the Human Resources Department in addition to my regular responsibilities of supervising the Central Business Office. So before I get into that, what I'd like to do is familiarize myself with you. I know most of you, I've been introduced to most of you, we've seen each other over the years, but for those who don't know my background, I'm going to give you a little bit of about me. My educational background, I have a BS in public accounting from Utica College. I have an MBA with a concentration in human resources management from SUNY Polytechnic Institute. And I'm certified as a school district business leader, and I received that degree from SUNY Cortland. I'm also a CPA. My work experience involves interning at Utica National as a corporate accounting intern when I was in college. I worked for D'Arcangelo & Company as a staff accountant for about 2.5 years. And then I was hired at BOCES as a CBO and records management supervisor in October of 1998. And interestingly enough, it was October 19th, 1998, and I started my new position as Human Resources Supervisor 22 years later to the day on October 19th, 2020. So that was kind of neat. So when I began the position, I had several short-term goals in mind. My first function in my head was to learn the essential human resources day-to-day tasks. I'm an accountant by nature, and everything is black and white to me, and I do math very well. But I needed some schooling in human resources. My intent was to start building relationships, acquiring some in-depth human resources training for myself, strengthening our procedures internally, communicating with all interested parties, creating visibility for my office, and identifying organizational needs and developing ways to meet them. At the time, my long-term goals were automation of the human resources process, becoming the hub or the central point for all supervisors, employees, anybody who had an interest in BOCES we would be the place to be, the point of contact for answers and help, and expanding our services. And then I was met with the unexpected. We had a pandemic, and that took over my entire focus. It took priority over everything that we did in our office and organizationally as well. The focus of the majority of the last 8 months for me has been working through the pandemic. And much of it was making sure that we're in compliance with all the mandates and laws, the FFCRA, FMLA, the ADA. Unemployment has been a real bear. And the bigger issue that I came to see was that we have employees that really had needs that needed to be met during the pandemic. There were many requests for accommodation. Many employees felt uncomfortable being in an office environment or a school classroom setting. So we had to help them work through that, and we had to help them make accommodations for them if we could, to either make them more comfortable in a classroom setting or so that they could perform their work functions in a different way. I answered as many questions as I could for our employees and provided options, advice when I could, and guidance as best I could. The main focus, I think, ended up being supporting our employees' well-being. We had a lot of employees who were not only physically affected by this, but mentally and emotionally. And I talked to a lot of them, and a lot of them just wanted an ear, and a lot of them said, what should I do? And a lot of it was just me taking a step back and listening to what they were saying, offering advice the best I could, but then telling them it really has to be your decision. I had one TA, he kind of broke my heart at the beginning of last year, called me crying because he wanted to come back to work so bad, but just didn't feel comfortable because of his underlying medical issues, and he ended up retiring. But he wanted to work badly, and I spent a lot of time talking to him, and he's still upsets me a little bit to this day. But I said, when all this is over, we'll be glad to have you back as a sub. So I'm hoping that does happen for him. So now as we're coming around the other side of the pandemic and things are kind of settling down a little bit, when Dr. Kilburn asked me to take a step back and say, why don't you take a look and really think about what you have accomplished besides just focusing on this pandemic. So I took a little time and I said, okay, well, wait a minute. It does look like I have been building these relationships with supervisors, the employees, and my staff. More than one person has said, hey, I was told to call you because you have all the answers. I don't think that's true. It's nice to hear. But the thing is, if somebody calls and needs an answer, I won't say to them, I don't know. I will say to them, hey, I'll get back to you. And if I'm not the person to answer your question, maybe I can point you to somebody that is the right person to answer the question. And I always try to ensure, hopefully, swift response times. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult, but people always get an answer. And if it's, hey, I got your email and I can't answer you right now, that's the email that they get back, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. I also discovered that I'm learning. There are some things that aren't completely foreign to me, such as civil service, that I'm going into more in depth. Thanks, Deb. It's been a learning curve. And then there are some things that are completely new to me, such as tenure, job postings. We're on our third superintendent search in the 8 months that I've been doing this. Staff recognition, that was a blast. There was a lot of work, more work than I ever thought was entailed in going to the staff recognition ceremony. Discipline, notices of subsequent arrest, things that I never had any idea went on in human resources. I'm absolutely learning about them. I'm creating a network using all my resources available to me. Internally, I use Mr. Hill. He's been great teaching me, especially about the instructional side. Mr. Morris, absolutely. Ann Whiteman always keeps me on track. She tells me what I'm doing, when I'm supposed to do it, and she explains to me why I have to do something. My staff are excellent. They are all top-notch, and they are solid. And they have helped me in every way whatsoever. Anytime I ask a question, they don't get frustrated with me, because I do tend to ask a lot of questions until I hear the answer that I understand. And so I don't have to keep asking the same question over and over, but they have been fabulous. Donna Rava has been wonderful with me. She was very heavily involved in the beginning, and I just got her timesheet for the last 2 weeks that she worked, and it was an hour and a half. And I looked at that and I said, oh, maybe I'm being kind of successful here. I don't need her quite as much anymore. So that's been great. She's been amazing. She has the history and the depth of knowledge that she has. I hope to have as much as she has someday. And then I use external resources, labor relations, our attorneys, SHRM, and the local Society for Human Resources Management, and the local chapter as well. And human resources is becoming the place to find answers. We get all the calls. And we never leave somebody hanging. And in a roundabout this way, this has created some visibility for our office. And we've gotten some projects underway. We've automated our orientation forms, which has been a great plus. We're developing leave procedures. We're working on better tracking attendance. We're tightening documentation. We're getting our FMLA requests down. So we really are moving forward. And to kind of reinforce my observations, as you know, a survey was done in May of 2020 for the Human Resources Office. And Dr. Kilburn said to me, how do you feel about doing a follow-up survey? And I said, I don't love the idea. I'm always kind of the person that is just, I expect the worst. But when we got the survey results back, I was very, very pleased. So 2 examples of the responses that we got. In May 2020, we had a response from someone that said, there has been a lack of timely responses to important questions, a general lack of knowledge and answers. In 2021, we had a similar response in that vein that said, timely responses to issues, ability to talk through issues and problems with someone that picks up the phone or returns calls, emails. Sensible direction, overall 100% better communication with no nonsense help. A second example was in May 2020, we got a response from someone that said communication is poor and at times strained because of missing documents or lack of follow through. It is such a vital department within an organization that is currently running as hands-off, not my job department. There's no support, guidance, collaboration, trust, or positive working relationship. In that vein, we got an answer in May 2021 that said direct communication accessible, phone calls always replied to, felt confident that we were collaborating towards a workable solution. So that kind of made me happy. And then of course I'm a statistics person, so I had to do the numbers, had to run the numbers, and 83% of responses to the second survey indicated an improvement. 89% of those 83% said that improved significantly, and 11% said improved somewhat. 9% gave a not observed or no change answer, and the people that say not observed said that they don't remember getting the survey in May 2020, and the one that said no change said that she had great service, or he had great service in May 2020 as well. So I had a proud moment. I was taking a little bit of a step back and said, hey, we're definitely moving forward. So now I'm looking forward, now that we're hopefully on the other side of this, and my short-term goals, continue what we started. Get that communication out there, work on developing and strengthening those procedures now that we can focus more on something other than pandemic, and continue my education and learning of human resources. My mid-range goal is to automate the hiring process, and maybe we'll start small like we did with the orientation documents, and start with creating fillable documents, and then hopefully find a software program that's compatible with our internal software program that we can get this whole thing automated. And I know that a lot of people have had that request, and it's definitely something that I intend to do. And my long-term aspirational goal, I do plan on being here quite a bit, so for quite a while longer, is to create an HR service that will be made available to some of our school districts. Even when I was just strictly CBO, I heard a lot of, hey, we could really use help. We don't have, we have a small business office and we don't have somebody that can help our employees with the human resources aspect. Is that something that you do? I said, well, it's not something that I do, but maybe it's something that human resources can look into, and oh, look, here I am. So it is something that I look forward, challenge that I look forward to accepting. And I don't know if it's going to be a service for district employees or a service for the business offices, or maybe both. But we'll get there. But we're moving forward, and I'm happy to say it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have been placed in this role, and I'm very excited about it, and I hope that you're all hearing good things, or no news is always good news too. So I hope that I'm doing well for you. So I'll be glad to entertain any questions if anybody has them.
I don't have questions, but
I do have a comment. This was one of the things that I was very interested in, that we got ourselves family friendly and were able to go out and serve districts. A couple districts did mention to me that they kind of had some things that perhaps human resource could help with, but they didn't feel comfortable at that point. So I am very, very happy with what you're doing. The strength of that office means a lot to this organization. The more that our employees respect what goes on there and feel comfortable coming and asking questions, the less problems we're going to have going there and coming to us. So thank you, Margaret.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions there?
Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
You are very welcome.
Great job.
Thank you. All right. Have a good night.
So next up, we're going to hear all about grading, and we're going to hear from Mr. Hill, Erica Schaaf, and Mike Hoover from Social Studies. I apologize, Mike. I had a glitch there.
You guys stay there. I'll stay here. So I asked Erica and Mike to come today. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory, as you all know, at the start of the year, when our grades started coming in September, we saw a real problem on our hands. And, actually, our component districts noticed it as well, and made us aware of that and worked with us on that. backstory. As you all know, at the start of the year, you can hear it again. Grades started coming in September. We saw a real problem on our hands, and actually our component. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. All right, continue on. So with that, we know we had to address it. The other thing is that our instructional staff was noticing massive inequities between children when they're home, right? So we can kind of level the playing field for students when they're in this. This is our social studies, P-Tech social studies classroom. Mr. Hoover can level the playing field here. But when we have kids at home with different resources and different capabilities, it's very difficult. So I asked Erica to head up a BOCES-wide committee to take a look at grading. And what I wanted her to do was to really challenge the status quo. Why are we giving grades the way we're giving them? Are we doing it just because this is what's always been done in education? For hundreds of years, we really haven't changed grading. So what we really wanted to start with is really to dive in and really think about what grades mean and why we assign certain grades to certain assignments and to look at it all. So she formed the BOCES-wide committee, and I wanted her to come today to talk to you about what they worked on this year. Erica?
Thank you, Mr. Hill. So this is a hot topic. I feel like you could add grading to like religion and politics, things you don't talk about at the dinner table. This is it. This is another one. So just to give you some background information, we created this committee. There are 22 members who serve on it, but that represents 6 different divisions. So MSA, Bridges, P-Tech, C-Tech, Itinerant Services, and our distance learning. All of those divisions have very different missions, and within those divisions, different teaching styles, in those educators. And I would also include our support staff, our counselors, our social workers. They all have their own philosophies. So when we first started, we were trying to figure out where do we start, and within all those different backgrounds that people were coming to the table with, what is the underlying common theme and belief we all had? And the one big takeaway to start was we all truly are in this because we want to do what's best for kids. We can all get on board with that. So that was our starting point. As Mr. Hill said, we realized with the pandemic that students who we knew very well, once March hit, from March until June, the numbers were showing us that they were struggling, and the numbers implied that they didn't know when they couldn't show mastery in certain content areas. But we knew these kids from September to March, and we knew those numbers were not indicative of what they really could do, their abilities. And so that's where we started looking at it saying, oh, is this fair? What we've done for so long. So the pandemic really shed some light on that. And really made us start looking at why are we doing things the way we're doing it. And I have to say, I taught at Westmoreland for 9 years as an English teacher. And through the research and the professional development, we learned all of the do-nots with grading. I did those. And I think, again, everyone goes into this with the best intentions, but our training has most of us doing these things without really understanding the effects on students. So I just wanted to give you that background information. We also, many of us on the committee, and again, that's administrators, teachers, our counselors, our social workers, we all started going to different PD sessions, and we have a shared drive that we are constantly just dumping information into. We reached out to our college partners, we reached out to our business partners, because what we hear a lot is that we have to teach these kids these skills now, or they will never be able to go to college if they don't do their homework. They'll never go into a career if they don't meet that deadline. Well, it's not necessarily true the more we dug into this. So with those partnerships, that also strengthened our work. So some of the PD that we've done, we have book studies that are currently going on, but the biggest professional development training that we attended was based on fair isn't always equal, 3 changes in grading practices. So in front of you, you have an outline of what those practices are. So if I could take you into those 3 main points, as a committee, we looked at the research, we looked at these topics, we brought them back into our divisions so we could get feedback from all of our staff in the organization, and then we came back as a committee many times to talk about these principles. So the first one, really interesting, grades should not reflect student behavior. Product versus process, what students know versus those professional skills effort, participation. So a good example of this would be the student in class who doesn't speak. They're penalized for that. A teacher might knock off 10% of their grade because they're not verbally speaking in class. Well, what is at the root of that? Why isn't the student doing that? So again, looking at behaviors and why students are or are not doing certain things. Super important to think about. The second principle, grades should reflect final proficiency, not practice. So a good example of this, and if you really want to make a teacher nervous, do not grade homework. All right, you see that on your handout right now. And when you see that, again, teachers at first, I love this committee because we have people from so many different backgrounds. For some teachers, they're saying, yeah, I've never done that. And others are saying, well, we have to do that. So homework should be a formative assessment, and it's ongoing. So if you think of it like a sport, right? So if a student shows up for practice and they don't do all that practice, we can't say we'll never put them in the game. They need more practice, and that's what homework is. So it sheds a little bit of light on that, allowing late work submissions and redos. And that's something that our teachers, especially this year because of the pandemic, we realized we had to be more flexible in those practices. And the third principle, grades should be based on accurate scoring and reporting methods that do not distort student grades. For example, averaging grades. Averaging does not accurately reflect a student's current level of mastery. It's a really good point, but something many of us do in our classrooms. So as we were looking at these principles, and really early on, we were thinking of some of these things, but again, the research just really confirmed our thoughts that maybe we need to start shifting our philosophy and some of the policies teachers have within their own classrooms. Mike Hoover came to me, like he always does, with these really awesome, crazy, out-of-the-box ideas, and if it's best for kids, why not entertain that? So Mike came to me and said, I have to change something in my classroom because these numbers, again, aren't representing what students can truly do. And how do we keep kids moving forward if they're just looking at numbers? What does a 50 mean? A 50 to one student means something completely different to another. One might look at it and say, well, it's not a 0. And then other students, it completely crushes them, especially during a pandemic when everything was out of our students' control, including their environment when they were not allowed to come to school. So again, how do we equal the playing field for that? So when Mike came to me and asked, can I start doing some things a little differently? Can I look at my current practices and maybe change the way I'm giving feedback to students? And it just made sense. So I would like Mike to share some of the things he has done in his own classroom. Mike also serves on our grading committee, so he also can share some feedback from other educators as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to wear 2 hats here. The first hat I'm going to wear is as the teacher representative on the grading committee. And then the second hat I'll wear is my personal experiences, sort of changing the practices that I've used in my classroom and some of the things that Erica described. So first, in terms of as a representative on the grading committee, as a teacher, there are 3 takeaways that we collectively have identified. And the first takeaway is that behavior should be separate from grades. A grade should be reflective of a standard, agreed upon standards that both teachers, students, and whatever curriculum that the teacher is using. And then separately, like behaviors should be assessed differently. Those should be based on feedback. Good example of that is in P-TECH, we have something called professional skills. Where we assess like personal accountability, communication, and respect. Those things shouldn't have a number attached to them. Instead, they should be primarily based on feedback, and the conversation is really the most important part of how that student grows as a learner. And at the end of the day, a grade is a reflection of what a student has learned aligned to the most important standards. Our second takeaway is, and a little bit of this is redundant, but that learning is continuous and relies on effective feedback that keeps students moving forward through the learning process. So an example of this would be allowing a student a retry. Just because a student doesn't get it the first time doesn't necessarily mean that they won't get it in the future. An example of this in social studies would be like a drafting process, or maybe like an ELA assignment. So like a rough draft, a student, and this is a little bit of my view, but students shouldn't necessarily get a grade. Rather, they should get feedback for that summative piece, which is their final assessment, right? And that's the final draft. That's when the grade occurs, because that's a product of their of what they've learned. And then feedback should be based on agreed upon standards, and again, those should be aligned to content. And then the last takeaway as a group that we've come up with is that there's a lot more work that we need to do in terms of how we can be more effective when assessing and communicating process or progress to students. So a little bit about my experiences. At the beginning of the pandemic, this going back to the spring 2020, I felt that the ordinary system wasn't really working, and I'm sure I wasn't alone in thinking that. I felt that things like zeros punish students, and that the system as a whole, we could do better, and maybe that there was something a little bit better that we can do to help our students grow and learn. So I took a curriculum class last year. I'm also pursuing leadership, and it opened my eyes to a system that could possibly exist that would be primarily based on feedback, that would be primarily based on standards. And I had the crazy idea of trying it. And I thought, what better year to do it than in a year of so many unknowns? So I spoke with Erica, and Erica supported me through the process. And she proved to be a sounding board as I tried to implement these new ideas, and I experienced successes and some things that I probably wouldn't do the same next time. So what does that look like in my classroom? First, I guess the way I've sort of called this is I haven't gotten rid of grades, but it's almost like a standards-based mindset where I've tried, especially in my core classes, an attempt to unpack the most important standards in my content area and really make it into language that students understand, so that they're thinking about like what they're actually learning. And that's how they're being assessed, and that's how they're going to receive feedback from me. And the other big thing that's part of that is I've also differentiated graded versus non-graded assignments. So I will tell students that I am not grading assignments and that they are getting feedback, and they are exclusively getting feedback. Interestingly, for some of those assignments, I have higher turn-in rates than I do for graded assignments. And I think one of the reasons why that works is because I've bought into this approach, or at least I've told myself that I'm going to buy into this approach for this year because I wanted to try it to see if it would work. And I think that's such an important part whenever you're going to try something like this that is a radical change in many respects, that there has to be buy-in from the person or people that are doing it. So I think that's one reason why I've had some success with it. And I guess if you're thinking about why would I just give feedback instead of exclusively relying on a grade, the thing that I really look for in terms of learning is building intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is the desire to learn for the process of learning, not for a grade. Extrinsic motivation is, what grade do I have, Mr. Huber? And that is exclusively the motivation. And I think there's probably a place for both of those. But I've made those two separate things in my class. And whenever a feedback-based assignment is given, that is to build toward the summative assessment, where, like going back to that rough draft example, student gets feedback based on what I'm looking for, and then they're going to submit that final draft. And that's across the board for most of my assignments in my class now. Perhaps the biggest change is that I've stopped giving zeros, and I've eliminated that entirely from my practices for the entirety of the year. And from my view, students already have 64 ways to fail. Why do I need to make it harder on them? And if a student gets a 0 on a big assignment, and in a social studies class, an essay, it would be an example of one of those. they may already be buried for the marking period, and they may only be 2 or 3 weeks through. So I've eliminated that entirely from my practices. 2 other things, rubrics express what students can do versus what they can do. My rubrics, I look at them in the past and I say to myself, wow, that was really something I would not do now. And what I'm talking about is previously, sometimes my rubrics might punish a student rather than express what a student can do, right? Because that's ultimately what a content standard is going to do. So I also didn't want to grade a student based on effort. Some of the things that Erica was talking about. So no more class participation rubrics or anything like that. And then finally, I think what this empowers me to do is not just feedback for students, but also feedback for parents. So on report cards, this gives me the ability to, instead of giving like an ambiguous comment, such as students doing outstanding work or satisfactory work or whatever, I can comment specifically on a skill like geography or where they stand in terms of grade level writing. So what does that 84 or 89 actually mean in social studies? Well, I'm going to tell the parent exactly what it means. And I think it gives me the ability to be a bit more dynamic in terms of the learning process. So I'm going to hand it over back to Erica.
So moving forward, we've learned we still have a lot to learn. It's a big topic. Something that also another takeaway from the committee, just to Mike's point about communication and feedback, was the idea in your handout you can see from the research, just the notion of maybe eliminating D's and F's. Instead, they would replace it with an IP in progress. That shift alone tells a student they're not a failure. They're still part of the process, and there's room to keep moving forward. And it's so important how we're communicating that to a learner, especially these young adults. And I'm just speaking from the high school's perspective, but grading, goes all the way down to kindergarten. So there is a lot of work to be done. This summer, we will continue with this work. We are looking at examples from other educational entities, including higher education, what those philosophies look like. Does it match our OHM BOCES mission and vision? And we will start drafting this summer to bring back to you for approval, your feedback, hopefully by August 1st. That is our goal. Any questions about that?
I appreciated your presentation, and just for your own information, Eric, I think you know, I spent 36 years in the classroom teaching English, and I kind of had a little bit of a difficulty with what you're presenting here in terms of grades, but we'll keep an open mind. What I would like you to consider, and I would suggest to you, is one thing that I found helpful to me in my classroom, and it goes back particularly to what Mr. Hoover was speaking of. It's not often done. When grading time came about, and I was responsible for turning in grades to my students, I took what some may consider a drastic step, but it was very important to me. And that is that I used to tell my students, look, you may be doing very well, you may be doing poorly, but I think the other side of that coin is that I may be doing very well, or I may be doing poorly. For all I know, I might be the worst teacher in the book, and probably was. So at that point in time, I would ask my kids to evaluate me. And I would give them a form with various things I was doing in the classroom and asked for their input. I made a point of making sure that it was anonymous. I've never been very good at checking handwriting, so that was out. And I even went so far as to say to a student, you collect them from the kids, just make sure you get one from everybody. I don't want any names or any identification or anything else. And I would take those home and I would read through them carefully. And out of them, I would determine what the students graded me as. I'm pleased to tell you I got a few A's. I'm not pleased to tell you I got a few F's. but I would report back to my students, this is the grade you gave me, and these are the improvements I will try and make. That was an important component for me in my classroom, and I would suggest you might want to consider something like that. It takes an unusual teacher, but we all know I'm off the wall anyways. Thank you.
But I think you're right. I think feedback, if we're giving it to students, we should receive it as well. So that's a great point, and thank you. We will consider that as we look forward to drafting this philosophy. Mr. Nicotera?
Just a question. Are there students impacted with this philosophy that go back half day to their component district?
Yes, so CTE
Right.
students are part of this.
Okay.
And right now, just to clarify, these are just conversations.
Mhm.
This is not policy, but it's if policy is created, which I know Mr. Hill will talk about in a minute. How are teachers, what are their beliefs that they can buy into, again, just to help students? During this pandemic, there were times, I know one day Mr. Hoover students had final presentations. And there was a student who did her house, it was too chaotic inside. She was sitting on a curb outside in Brooklyn, in the city, because she was removed from her home here. And she did it, but that was her learning environment. So again, it's also trying to create equity in our grading philosophy.
And the reason I ask that is, as you advance in your training and your exploratory, we want to keep consistency. So maybe we can involve some of the component districts and be part of those discussions. And that way a child doesn't have there can't be two different processes. One for the morning session and then a different philosophy when they go back to the component district again. If you can, as time goes on, allows you to reach out to the component districts and see if we can involve some guidance counselors or representative of those faculties to just become part of that discussion.
Sure, I think that consistency is important. And something we didn't mention yet, another big takeaway from the committee was the thought, just the conversation right now of should grades and the skills be two separate grades? So we've talked about in CTE and in PTech, they have employability profiles that they create throughout their time here. And again, just being able to show what they can do, not just on paper, and hearing the district's feedback would be really important in that process.
Thank you.
Okay. A couple of things. One, I just want to build on the doctor's comment there on the feedback. The feedback can be very instructive, not so much to you, but also to the student on how to give feedback. So consider that also, giving them the skills to give good feedback. But what I wanted to mention is another issue. When I read this, all kinds of red flags came up. For example, do not grade homework. Well, that leads to some other issues I'll expound on if you wish, but I can wrap it up more easily because I noticed you're not doing that. You are selecting what you grade and what you don't grade. So your delivery was very nuanced and very mindful, and I didn't see anything I could comment negatively on. My real comment is this is an example of you have to communicate what you're doing on paper to other teachers. And that's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a challenge. We all know teachers are humans, and a lot of them are cookie cutter. And they're going to read this and say, I'm never going to do that homework thing anymore. I'm covered. So be careful of that and try to be mindful of how you are going to communicate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And that's why we were also mindful to say we are not experts and we've all done these things.
I know.
Just awareness is good. Thank you.
So Erica, if I can't put an example in my mind, it's like a sieve. So imagine that I'm a student and I have to learn the life cycle. And as part of the grade, maybe you break it down into a 4-point rubric. So a child who can identify the life cycle successfully would receive a score of 1. That's how we do our state testing program. So if that might sound foreign to some people, you'd have a 1 out of 4. Another child is able to describe the life cycle. They would get a score of 2. The third range of scoring would be for children who are able to compare and contrast the life cycle that takes place between a snail versus a frog. And they can describe the differences and where it's common. And a score of 4 would be for the student who can create an analogy that depicts the life cycle in a creative way, right? Somebody might write a song, another child writes a whole story about the cloud and the sun, and it describes the life cycle in a very different way. Now, if I'm understanding this correctly, the child that initially at the beginning was able to identify the life cycle, you don't want to pin the grade right there. They want to be able to revisit and continue with that work, because that child may take longer, but can actually get all the way to the analogy. They could be your composer. And sometimes we freeze grades at certain time points, and we get a snapshot of what the child has learned, but not really understanding what mastery is. So by getting the teachers who are delivering that content to agree what is important about the life cycle, how are we going to create a rubric or table that has different levels, the 1, 2, 3, 4, so we know how to grade children? The children would get that ahead of time so they would understand what they should be learning. We wouldn't freeze frame children, right? We'd give them a chance to continuously revisit because we want them to learn. Now, I have a child in my class who is late every single day. And they're really not good at handing in their homework. I also happen to know, not that it maybe matters, but maybe it does, that when they come home from school, they're taking care of their 3 younger siblings, and that's why homework is hard. But neither here nor there, they were able to identify, describe, compare, and create an amazing analogy on the life cycle. So I might want to give them a grade that really demonstrates what they've learned on the life cycle. They've achieved mastery on that standard, so they're going to get a 4. But I'm also going to give them an effort score for the fact that they are continually late, because that's a professional skill we want to make sure we address with the child. So we're going to give them feedback about the fact that they're not on time regularly, and we're going to say that needs improvement in that area. So the child will get 2 separate scores. Is that an analogy that sums up kind of where you're going with this?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that, to me, that made sense. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I want to thank Dr. Kilburn for saying what she did, because those were basically my concerns. I certainly support reevaluating how scores are given, but at the same time, you know, I'm very concerned that there's some pressure that we're not getting the grades that we want, so we're going to change the way we grade, rather than the child learn what they were supposed to learn, you know. So I just have some concerns here. Again, I want to support what you're doing as far as reevaluation, but I too, as along with a couple other board members, have kind of have some concerns also. So I just wanted to put that in.
Can I go? I just wanted to say that as I'm listening to and reading this, I really enjoy and appreciate the fact to really have a goal for student mastery, because I think that gets lost sometimes along the way, because you forget, you know, someone screws up at the beginning of the semester, then, you know, all is lost, like you said. So to stick with it. And I think also your approach about giving feedback instead of a grade, that's a lot more work for the teacher. And thank you for doing that, because that's, you know, that is a lot of extra effort too. You could have easily just, you know, multiple choice, here it's great, too bad, whatever it is. But to sit and really spend time and give feedback, because that's additional layer of learning, right? Teaching. So the focus on mastery, I think that's fantastic. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
So we have a lot more work to do right now. So just a couple of things. So one of the big goals of us as an organization is to really look at the philosophy and develop a policy. But we need to understand those are two separate things. We'll probably come to you guys in the summer, come to this board in the summer with some recommendations. Obviously, the board that goes to the policy committee, that's work of the policy committee, will come with some recommendations. But it's just as important for us to really examine our thinking about grades, because if we have a policy that says homework is worth this percentage and this, that really doesn't change if somebody's looking at this through a punitive lens. And what we've really seen over the course of the years, because of the pandemic, has really kicked this up, has really made us look at grading through an equity standpoint. And what we don't want to have is systematic barriers to success. We don't, by any means, we do not want to not teach accountability, not teach responsibility. Like, we're running career programs here. We have to teach that, but we have to have systems that eliminate those barriers. And a lot of that is not just policy. A lot of that starts with the way we think about grades. And I think what Erica and her committee have been very successful at this year is just getting our folks internally to challenge that status quo. Why do we use 0 to 100? Why aren't we using 1 through 4? Why aren't we using, like, there's a million different ways. Why are we doing what we're doing? And look at it, because these barriers that we've seen have slammed us right in the face this year. So we have an opportunity to learn from this year and to build on it. So those are the two things we'll move forward, but we'll be the first to tell you we have a long way to go as far as learning in this realm.
I do want to say, first of all, thank you for this work, and thank you for updating us on the progress with this group. So Erica, you had begun to say there's things like you don't talk about at the dinner table, right? And politics is one. And among teachers, put every teacher in a room and talk about grades. And it's almost like we can be pulling each other's feathers out, right? Because it's our home turf. So this is touchy stuff, but it's the good stuff, right? It's about children, and it's about rethinking our practices. So thank you very much for taking the time, and I wish you the best with the continued work. And Mr. Stewart.
Thank you.
Yes, I applaud the efforts. I really, really do. I was going to keep quiet about this, but poverty and growing up in it and getting Fs in school just beats you up to death. So if you can do anything about that, and I applaud the efforts and continue the work. Give every kid, this is about kids, give them a chance. Just give them a chance. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
Russ, I wasn't going to say anything either, but I thought I can't leave the dinner table without having a discussion. So I sit here and I view it from a parent view, a teacher view, and then the BOCES view. And I think in some of the comments that were made, we were mixing the home district view with the BOCES view. I feel like the kids that we serve here are not going through a traditional education system. They're not looking at the end to take their SATs or ACTs. We're building skill sets towards careers, and a rubric serves itself in those environments very well. I graduated SUNY Oneida, and it was all about the push for a rubric. And I was trying to do the math about 15 years ago. So I would be very interested to know, there was an influx of rubrics at one time for educators to use. If there's any staff around, that were using it, I'd love to know, and not necessarily report back to me, but I think it would lend itself to where did it go? Because when I taught pre-K, it was all rubrics. Everything was rubrics. And it served well at the end of the year, because you sent that to a kindergarten teacher and said, here's where they are with different skill sets. So it would be just interesting to know, how did we get so far away from that? And now we're cycling back,
And I've seen firsthand student responses when Mr. Hoover has a conversation about a writing piece. Again, it's not a number, but a conversation that keeps moving them through the process of their learning. It's so effective. 3 years ago, we created academies in P-TECH. So every content area teacher is a leader of their academy, and they serve as a mentor. And we created, alongside our business partners and our college partners, a professional skills rubric. And again, the things they say not to do, I thought it was so smart by having that be part of the student's actual grade. And now that I'm reading this and thinking about equity, I'm realizing that was not a smart move. But anyway, I had good intentions. But when they sit down with their academy leader and they have conversations about where they are novice, proficient, just those conversations about those professional skills, it's interesting to hear what students don't realize. And I know I never had those conversations in high school. You don't know what you don't know. And so those moments are so valuable, and it also builds relationships. So back to your point, just giving kids second, third, fourth, fifth chances so they really can demonstrate taking those barriers all away, which I think our programs at BOCES, we really do that. There's a lot of intent behind the work that we do here. All of these conversations are simply just to give kids those chances to really show us what they can do. So I really thank you so much for your input, for your feedback, your suggestions. They're so helpful and important for this work. So we will continue plugging along, and I thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Now we're going to move on to the section 7, there's approval for the minutes. So I need a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting from May 12th, 2021. Can I get that?
Also move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Moore, second by Mr. Stewart. Okay, thank you. And move on to the approval for the consent agenda. Okay, we're going to look for an approval for the consent agenda, items B, C, and D, but we are withdrawing for the time being. Item number 7, C, capital C, little b, 1.1. So that item will be withdrawn at this point. But bar that, we're looking for approval of consent agenda for B, C, and D. Can we get a motion for that?
So
Moved by Mr. Nicotera, second by Mr. Salerno. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, we'll move that on there. Go on, Dr. Kilburn. Got board topics? We don't have any board topics or old business, right? No old business. Okay, so at this point, we have to go into, we don't need a motion for executive. We just go in executive, we need a motion. No, we need a motion for executive. We got it from Mr. Stewart.